So what we're going to talk about today are our greatest fears and biggest dreams as writers. Does anybody want to volunteer to start? Okay, I'll start with my biggest fear, and I think it's probably anybody who's been following my blog or following our conversations, is that my writer's block will more or less become permanently, and I'll probably never write another word. It still is a huge problem for me, and I was thinking about this earlier today. Someone would say, but you've published 2 things in the last year and a half. How can you claim to have writer's block? I published a novella and I published a novel, and all I can say is that in that year and a half to publish those, I probably only wrote about 30 or 40,000 words, which I shouldn't say only. I was able to finish those, but my ability to write and progress through a story that's longer than a piece of flash fiction is just not there. It's not what it was for the first 10 years or so when I started writing. And it's been going on long enough that like I said, I'm concerned that it might become a permanent feature of who I am. So that's my biggest fear, is that writer's block is actually going to destroy my ability to write.
Do you want suggestions?
Sure.
Anyhow?
And well, let me. So one of the things I'm trying to do, because one of the things when we emailed about this is, okay, what do we, besides our greatest fear, what are we doing to try to prevent it from happening? And one of the things I'm doing is branching out into other creative areas like painting, and at some point I'm going to start to learn an instrument and that type of thing, and also trying to come up with different ways to share things that I've written, or to come up with different ways to approach writing something. So just before we got on this call, I just there's a new app that Spotify has called Anchor that you can do podcasts. And a couple of weeks ago, in connection with a writing group I'm in, I wrote a short piece of fiction that I don't even know the terminology for it, but I basically read the piece, and it's the first episode of my new podcast on Spotify. So I'm just, trying to come up with new ways to keep creative, and also different ways to maybe share what I'm doing, and maybe that can spark something. So if you have suggestions, I'm all ears.
Well, I was going to say somewhat similar, that maybe just if you feel like you're not getting the inspiration for a new novel, keep the small stuff anyway, because I mean, that's what it really is. I don't necessarily know if I believe in the classic writer's block definition, like you can't come up with anything. I think it's more like you haven't found the right idea at the moment that's going to give you a tree instead of a petunia. So I would say, keep to short stories, keep to short ideas, keep to, because the more of those you write, first of all, I think the more likely you're going to stumble on a collection of ideas that might be able to come together or lead to something else. And or just keeps those muscles flexing. I mean, because that's what I do in my downtimes. I write little essays and stuff. Even sometimes my tweets, just to try to work things out with a little bit of dialogue. But that's what I would say is, if the big is your problem, then keep small. If the small is your problem, like you can't even come up with like a little essay to write on a topic or anything like that, then that might be a little different. And then that might be, you need to branch out more. Maybe that particular well is temporarily dry, but there are plenty out there, So new experiences, et cetera, take trips. But I don't think that's, from what I heard, that's not your problem. It's really looking for the next, your next book. And honestly, I think that's got to be very common, because there are only certain concepts, plots, ideas, or characters even that can last an entire book or more. So
it's not necessarily a block in terms of looking for my next book. It's when I first started writing, I wrote dozens of short stories, and my head was always in a story.
Right.
And over the last few years, that has stopped, and all the ideas for short stories have kind of dried up. And then I have these, the reason the two things that I published were what I refer to as one of my many half-completed works in progress. And what happens with longer pieces is there comes a point, essentially, the third way, a third of the way in or half of the way in, where I just suddenly get bogged down and I don't know how to keep going. And it becomes much more of a slog than an enjoyable experience.
I see.
So.
And maybe the way it works for me with that is I always know where I want it to end. And so even if I get bogged down, I can kind of just crank out some kind of stuff. I'd say one of my biggest current fear with, I have this work in progress, and I stopped to rewrite a bunch of it in the middle, and it's kind of bogged down. But I mean, at least I do have a first draft, longhand draft. I was typing away and I thought, no, this is dumb. So I had a bright idea in the shower, and I rewrote about 4,000 or 5,000 words that are quite different from what was there originally. But I always know where I'm going. And my biggest fear is that when I finish the thing and it's a Word document and I go to read it, that I'll decide that it's just crap. And just, either that or I'll sort of say, well, it may be crap, but I'm going to publish it anyway. I don't know which of those works. To scrub it, to put it out there, even though it's substandard. And I'm really hoping I don't have to make that decision.
Use a pseudonym then. Use a pseudonym and publish under that.
Well, I can't. It's a sequel to something that's already my name on it. So.
The person that you assigned your literary works to published it.
Yeah, that's right. Maybe I should pretend that I'm dead, and this is how
fake your death.
Die and have somebody else writes more stuff using their name.
There you go. There's an idea for a book. An author who fakes his or her death to get out of a contract with their publisher.
Yeah.
Before we go further, I just want to mention, Richard, that one of your novels was an inspiration for the names of two pets in the thing that I just narrated and posted.
Really?
I don't know why, but I decided to name the English bulldog Beelzebub and the macaw Lucifer. So.
Well, Matt, his abbreviated versions for both of those are Bub and Luke, which they hate. So,
Good one.
So you could use those if you want, but.
Audrey, did you have any other great fears that you?
Well, I was just thinking of old fears from back when I was submitting stuff, sending out things to publishers. I used to like opening up the mailbox, the physical, mailbox where you get paper mail was always a terrifying experience, and because a rejection letter could be in there, or seeing postal trucks whizzing around. I think, man, has one of them got the old manuscript in it with the rejection? I mean, it was pathetic, really. And that's one of the nice things about self-publishing is at least I don't have to think about that. So yeah, and some other things. The fear of losing the manuscript, from some sort of electronic disaster. I mean, I do have backup copies and so on, but I did lose a big chunk of the very first book once and had to rewrite it from at least I had the longhand draft. But of course, I changed a lot of it as I went along. So I always think of that lost stuff as it must have been much better than what I eventually ended up with.
I lost two things, so I can empathize with that. I lost two books I was working on, so yeah, that's a big one.
I lost something for a few years, and it was just like the opening pages of something that I produced in a workshop, and it was something where I really liked the rhythm of what I did, and I wanted to carry it forward based on this idea that I had. And then I looked for the handwritten pages, and it's like, it's gone. There's no way. I know I didn't throw that out. And I looked in every single scrap of paper and pile of stuff that I have, that, all my different ideas and things, and it was gone. And I looked like every 6 months for about 2 years. And one time I decided, okay, I can't find it. Let me try to recreate it. And I didn't like what I tried to recreate. So I just kind of gave up. And then 6 months later, I decided to look for it again, and I found it.
Oh,
Wow.
So it's just,
was it as good as you thought?
well, it became the novel that I wrote that's now unpublished. And I love the novel, but it's unpublished as for reasons that, we won't go into here.
Right. Yeah, but I've noticed that the thing you lose always was a work of stunning genius.
Yes,
right?
exactly.
Now, if you ever find it again, then you think, oh man, was this the work of stunning genius? No, someone while it was lost.
My chance of great fame. How about you, Bertold? Anything that you're afraid of?
I mean, one fear, of course, I have is always that stuff I write will just turn out to actually be no good. But I think my biggest fear is just that people aren't reading anymore. And I mean, I include myself in that because, there are times when I'll find myself like scrolling through YouTube and I think, like, this is sad because I'm an author. I should be reading right now. How can I expect anyone to read my books if I'm not reading books?
Yeah. Well, based on all your reviews, I think you're doing plenty of reading.
I could be doing more, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of ironic that at a time when there's more people writing and publishing stuff than ever, there's fewer people reading because there's so many other things that are attractive, like YouTube or Netflix or whatever, gaming. You know about gaming, Bertold.
So, absolutely. That's one of the things. All these things are, they take time away that you could spend reading. And I often find, reading it takes more like discipline to get into it, but it's more rewarding ultimately most of the time. So, but I don't know. It's something I worry about, that what if nobody's reading anymore, then what's the point of all this?
When we were on vacation, we were outside a restaurant waiting for a table, and we were talking to another couple who was there. And I don't know how it came up. I think my wife actually mentioned it somewhere in the context of the conversation. She mentioned that I was a writer, and they were very interested in that. And I forget what the woman said, but at some point she said something about, wanting to look my books up. And I said, and I ever since I asked this question, I've thought, God, that could be so insulting or embarrassing or something. But I said something along the lines of, oh, do you like to read? Because I just don't expect people to actually read these days. And it's like, okay, I appreciate your interest, but if you don't like to read, let's move on to a different topic. It's kind of like that. So I don't know.
So what did she say?
Oh, she said yes, and then her husband said she's got shelves of books all over the house. So.
Well, that's encouraging.
How about you, Richard? What's your big fear?
Well, of course, I have a lot of irrational and big fears that have nothing to do with writing. So we don't want to go into those.
In our next podcast, we'll talk about spiders and snakes.
Actually, snakes, yeah. I did think about it, and I think I had it. There's the usual one, which, like Bertold said, every time I write, my major fear, just like almost anyone else, is what I'm writing is going to be poorly received. It's going to be garbage. It's not going to be up to what I want. So I'm going to ignore that because that's a common one. But I think my other big fear is just that simply, it gets so much tiny visibility now. I would hate for it to become nothing. I mean, honestly, because, and it's not because doing all the work and nobody will read it. I mean, I did that most of my life. I was writing privately, but sort of like, even when I did that, I'd still send stuff to friends, and it was the idea of making people think differently or feel better or, laugh, whatever. And if that got completely closed out, then I kind of doubt, why am I even doing it? I guess the whole point of my doing it and then taking the next step to publishing. And if that goes away, like if I put something out, absolutely no one sees it or reads it, well, maybe my friends would still read it, but I don't know. I would really start questioning why I'm doing what I'm doing. So, and I don't think that'll ever happen, because I think I'll still find 10 people desperate enough to want to read. but it is like a concern. Yeah.
Is 10 enough for you?
Well, probably. Honestly, I'd like thousands and hundreds of them, but because of, it sounds corny, but the more you can affect the world positively, and I hope it's positive, the better life you have led. And that's, and I tend to be very insular very much, and I do help people out wherever I can. But I think this is the easiest way, if you get that foot in the door, to do it on such a grand scale, even if it's a small amount of somebody's well-being, or they think a little different. They name their pets after something that they've read in my book. I know that sounds trivial, but that's big to me. That's big because it means, like, in a positive way, small, because I really believe in those small drops, with ripples. I affected somebody. That's all I ever ask out of this. It's not the millions of dollars. It's not the fame. Although I wouldn't say no to the millions of dollars, and I wouldn't want to be a guest on the talk show, but not kidding around there. But really, it isn't. It is just affecting people's lives positively, because I'm getting closer to the doorway. Is that a good way to put it? And I'd like to look back and say, hey, it was small, but it was good. The effect I had, and it was broad. That's the big thing. The ripples went out. So, and that would kill me if, at some point there weren't any ripples, there was nothing going on. I don't know what I probably actually would just start seeing if I can actually develop any other talent. And I have been very unsuccessful in that. I should show you the results of my pottery class someday, which I loved, but every vase that I imagined came out to be a small little cup. Misshapen. So, that's my big fear, that with the little talent I have will go to no use, and that would be a total waste rather than, just that way something had been gained.
See, what you're describing is one of the, as I've dealt with writer's block, one of the 83 reasons why I explain I have it and I'm struggling with it is the payoff, whatever the payoff is at the end, is it worth the work and the effort that goes into doing this? And again, when I've talked about this before, I've blogged about this before, I've talked about this, and one of the struggles I have is if it takes me a year or 2 years to write a novel and I put it out there and the same 50 to 75 people are buying it that bought my last one, and I'm not expanding my audience. I mean, do I expect to write a bestseller? No, but it would be nice. What I think my most rational hope is, not my biggest dream, but my most rational hope is every time I write something and publish it, that the audience grows a little bit. And that's not happening. So why am I doing this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and as I struggle with that, it's like, okay, I'm not going to write today because why am I doing this?
Yeah, especially, if it becomes work, and hard work, and something you have to force yourself to do, and there's no payoff as you perceive payoff, then the question, why are you doing it? It's different when you sort of feel obsessed with something, you feel compelled to write, and just the act of writing it and creating it is a reward in itself. Then it really doesn't matter as much anyway, if anyone else reads it. But when you sort of lose that magic, like you seem to have done, and I know what that feels like too, it becomes work and there's no payoff, and why?
Yeah. Okay, Bertold, what's your greatest hope as a writer?
Greatest hope.
Dream.
Really, it's the idea of having a community of writers, sort of like what we're building here, where everybody feels like they can share their work and discuss their work and just have it, they feel like it's meaningful and ideas are leading on to ideas. I think when you can get together a group of writers who are all working on something, it can sort of build up a critical mass of creative energy, I think. And if you can make a vibrant writing community, I think a lot of great stuff can come out of that. And I mean, I think we're making serious progress towards that. I truly believe that. So that's, when I started, I should say that originally my goal was like, oh, I'll get famous, I'll make $1 million like Richard was talking about. And I quickly realized that's probably not going to happen. and I also realized, though, that as I started reading indie books, I was like, there are a lot of people out there who have written books that are better than mine that get even fewer reviews than mine get. So I'm like, well, if this isn't getting read by anyone, there's no hope for me. So the only hope is to try and, just try and get the good work that's being done to be recognized. My dream is to get to a point where that can happen.
Yeah. My big dream when I first started was, remember, I think I've spoken about this, to get interviewed on our public radio that we have in Canada, the literary programs, that they'd be on there talking about what inspired me and why I wrote this and that. Well, I kind of let go of that one. I think if I wanted to get into that, I should have done a creative writing degree and schmoozed with the right people and been sort of on the topics of the day, because the public radio is very sort of conscious of the things that really matter right now. And let's face it, the books produced by middle-aged white people just aren't it anymore. Not unless you can sort of click, even as a middle-aged white person, you can kind of click into the things that do matter, that are issues to do with other kinds of people, but let's not go there. So I kind of dropped that one. And then I sort of had this idea that wouldn't it be nice if you're on the bus one day, like I used to commute to work by bus, and you see someone reading your book, just an ordinary person. And I mean, that sort of happens in a way, because I people in the blogging world and stuff, some of them have read my books and said things about them. And that's sort of the electronic equivalent of the bus, I guess. I mean, some of you guys are part of that. So in a way it's there. And I've kind of modified my expectations. And and I do kind of like the idea of the community of writers. And it sort of exists on WordPress. Like there's people you see on different blogs commenting, and even when you look at some of those Goodreads reviews that I've been griping about lately, not the sort of dubious reviews, but some of the more thoughtful and better ones, they're written by people I recognize from blogging, some of them.
Yeah.
The authors are people I recognize from blogging. So there is this sort of loose community that's sort of based on the internet. And that I think is a good thing. And if I can sort of have a place there and be a credible contributor to that, then I think that's a realistic dream, actually. So that's where I'm at now.
Well, if it helps, Audrey, I used to take the bus to work too, and I read The Friendship of Mortals while riding the bus to work. So.
Well, I've been on that bus.
Unfortunately, you were not on the same bus.
Unfortunately,
but it happened.
I mean, I can't imagine. It's either that, or you walk into a bookstore and you see your book on the shelf, or in a library or something. That would just be, and every once in a while I see writers who describe something like that happening on Twitter or something like that. And it's like, that must just be the feeling. That right there, seeing someone you don't know holding your book, or seeing it on a shelf in a bookstore, would just be so incredible.
Yeah. It comes down to validation from people who don't know you. Like they
Right,
aren't
exactly.
They aren't people who are sort of, they don't owe you anything because they don't know you, and yet there they are, at least looking at the thing you've created. And That is gratifying, I must say. Yeah, I guess that's what we
So,
all.
yeah. So before we get to you, Richard, my dream that I don't think I've really ever shared with anybody, besides having a bestseller and making millions, is every once in a while when I watch a movie, I think to myself, I want one of my stories up there on the screen. I think that would be the feeling of that would be a million times greater than seeing someone you don't know reading your book. To have
Yeah,
one of my stories presented on the
it's-
big screen or whatever. I'm sorry, what'd you say, Audrey?
Movies are a big project, right? They involve hundreds or maybe thousands of people
Yeah.
and lots of
Yeah.
money. And the fact that someone would take your creation and do that with it, yeah, that would certainly be. So do you ever like have certain people in mind to be the, like certain actors to be the characters?
No, but I've converted a couple of my stories into scripts, and I have a niece who's kind of in the industry, and every once in a while I talk to her about it, and she's busy, so kind of hard to get her attention. But it's something that I'm going to keep thinking about and pondering. I have a friend who used to write scripts and screenplays, and he thought my long short story Deviation would be a great 2-person play, which we haven't ever followed up on that. But that's my like secret dream, is I would love to have something I wrote on the screen. So how about you, Richard?
Well, before I get to the big dream, I do want to say that I've said on other interviews before, what Audrey said, with just a slight variation. I said my dream, might say my smaller dream in a way, is, even though it's not small, but is I'm on a train and somebody's reading my book. I mean, that'd be great. But what I really, and I've always said this, is if as they're reading, you go, that little, just that little unsuppressed laugh. And I was telling this to one of my cousins. She said, well, if it makes you feel better, it's just like almost Bertolt. She said, when I was on the plane, on the way back, people kept turning their heads because I started laughing out loud a couple of times. So I'm like, all right, it happened. I wasn't there, but it did happen. So anyway, but actually, Mark, what you said is my bigger dream, in a way, because everything I've written, every time I've written anything, it's always very visual. I always think in terms of almost like it's a movie of some kind when I'm writing it and thinking about it. And so, yeah, and again, it isn't quite for the fame or the money. It's because I feel like the work is adapted for that already. But again, having said that, I think, because you both said those things, and both said, hey, yeah, but what I was thinking before either of you said it, was, again, to echo back to before, I want to break that wall. And I am not going to write the great American novel. That's not me. I don't have that ability.
Right.
I don't even want to. But I can write good candy, okay? So I want that candy out there. And what I would really love is, it's almost like, I don't want to be, I'm not going to be in the major leagues, but can I get to a AAA team where I just have a group of people who are looking forward to that next book, and there's interaction, like, because I'm very open, and I'll give everybody an email to contact me, et cetera. And it's like, people writing and asking about the book, and just that kind of back and forth that the creatives of any kind love, except probably artists. They seem to really don't want to hear anything, but a lot of creatives want that interaction with fans or friends or whatever, and it's an emotional high for me. So
Yeah.
And even especially if that discussion starts out about something in the book and leads to something else completely, it has nothing to do with, that's like a big dream. You break that wall to get enough people that community, gets created. Small community, but there you go. Nothing is as grand community that Bertolt said, and then I'm a little like, oh gosh, he said such a nice thing about with all writers. I'm thinking selfishly. But I did want to ask you, Bertolt, in the context of this, this thing that we do on YouTube, are you considering looking to expand that and see if you get other guests and stuff, or? I'm just,
Yes, I've
because
thought
this is a
about,
great format.
I there are some people I'm thinking about asking to, and I know Mark and I have both asked a few people who have both been like, no, not for us. But but yes, I'm always curious to expand this.
Yeah, I mean,
I've wanted to expand both who participates in these, who contributes to the blog. I don't want necessarily anybody and everybody. I feel like, there needs to be some quality control, but I think there's a lot of indie authors that we all know, and I would love to have more people participate in these, talking about their books, talking about their approach, whatever it is. I mean, when you volunteered to join us, that was great. And Chuck Litka's now gonna start writing up for the blog directly rather than sending them to me. And anything that we can do to expand the effort on the blog to include more good indie authors who care about the craft and want to help and support each other, absolutely, that's exactly what we want to do. So anybody out there who's listening to this, watching it, we want to include you,
including the people that I've asked before. You can change your mind.
Yes, me too. Me too.
Let me just vouch that it is enjoyable because it gets you to think. You are interacting. It's building a community. And my suggestion would be, if you're unsure, then just come on for a spot where we could talk about your work or fill my chair for a while, whatever. And if you're comfortable and you find it enjoyable, then great. And if not, well, it's an experience. It's not like you were on the Tonight Show or something and millions of people. You get to experiment and try something new. So
we don't make you sign a contract.
Right. There's no contracts. There's, unfortunately though, there's no marketing. We don't make action figures, so you won't be one of those. But it's fun. It really is fun because it's relaxed.
Yeah, and I enjoy the opportunity to just talk about writing and what's going on, and to hear what other people are doing and thinking and how they approach things, and successes, failures, all of it. It's just it's fun to just talk with other writers.